kindergarten, and welcome to another reading lesson. Today we are going to be reading another text all about another community helper we find helping in our communities. Our text today is about the post office. Before we dive into our reading thinking job and the text, your teacher is going to pause the video and you guys are going to talk about post office workers. What do you know about this job? What do you know about a mailman or a person that works at a post office? We'll save those thoughts because we are going to dive more in to what a mailman or a post office worker does. In an earlier lesson, we practiced retelling key details in the text A Day in the Life of a Firefighter. And today, we're going to continue to practice using the post office book so that we can better understand a new topic. Remember to use our own words when we retell the text, which we'll do at the end of the lesson and you'll do in Seesaw today. So let's dive in and find out what our reading thinking job is for today. Today, our reading thinking job is I can retell key details of a text, and we'll be using the post office book. Our reading thinking steps to get to our reading thinking job of I can retell key details of a text in order. First, we're going to listen to the book and you guys are going to talk about what the text is mostly about. Then we're going to look at those details and decide which details help us understand this text the most. And then we'll retell those details. Remember, key details are the most important parts of the story. We're reading informational text right now, which gives us information about real world things that we can see out in our own community. But it's important to be able to know that those key details are what is going to help us better understand this topic. So we'll be looking at who, what, where, when, and why. So before we dive into doing our thinking steps, let's listen to the text, the post office book. This book, Mail and How It Goes, by Gail Gibbons. Since early times, people have sent messages and packages to one another. Nowadays, we have modern ways of sending mail. The sender pays to have something mailed. A stamp shows the cost. A heavy piece of mail costs more to send than a lighter piece. An address and zip code tell where the mail is going. Things can be mailed at a post office or placed in a mailbox. A letter carrier picks up mail from the mailbox. The mail goes to the local post office, where it is sorted by hand to divide local mail, mail for nearby places, from mail for out of town. The out of town mail is put on a truck and sent to the big area post office. The big area post office receives mail from many local post offices. The regular mail goes to a canceling machine. The machine prints a postmark on the envelope and marks the stamp with wavy lines so they cannot be used again. Next come the sorting machines. Postal workers at the machines read the zip codes and punch the numbers into a computer, which drops the letters into the correct zip code bins. Other postal workers stack the letters into the correct zip code trays. The trays are then boxed and tied. All the mail is then loaded onto trucks. Some trucks go to boats or planes. Their mail will go to foreign countries. Some trucks bring their zip-coded mail straight to the other big area post office. Other trucks carry zip-coded mail for faraway parts of the country. The mail is put onto planes going to the different zip code areas. There it is unloaded and sent to the correct big area post office. At the big area post office, the mail is sorted again to the smaller local post offices, where it is sorted once more. Some of the mail goes into private mailboxes that people rent right at the post office. Letter carriers pick up the rest of the mail and deliver it to you. More mail facts. The word post, as in post office, comes to us from the days of ancient Rome. A post was a marked place along the road where letter-carrying messengers could stop to switch their tired horses for new ones. In earlier days of our country, a letter was paid for by the person receiving it. George Washington, our first president, wrote the first letter to be sent by airmail. It went by balloon. Benjamin Franklin was the first postmaster general of our country. His picture was on the first American postage stamp. The Pony Express was started in 1860 to carry mail to the new territories of the Wild West. It took the riders 8 days to travel the rugged 1,950-mile trail. Camels carried mail in the South during the Civil War. Reindeer used to carry mail in Alaska. Stamp collecting is the most popular hobby in the world. Close to 1 billion letters and packages are mailed in the United States each year. Now that we listened to the text, The Post Office Book, Mail and How It Moves, we're going to talk about what this text is mostly about. Before we dive into this, let's talk about the front cover. The front cover has the title, which is The Post Office Book, and the author. Remember, we can find the author by looking for the word by, and if it has an illustrator, the illustrator will be on the front cover too. When we start reading a text, we always want to make sure we're looking at the front cover because good readers read from left to right. So we need to make sure that we're always starting with the front cover. What are some things that we can look for to know that we're on the front cover? Right. We can look for the picture, if there is one on the cover. The picture is going to be what the text is mostly about. It'll have the title, and it'll have the author, and maybe an illustrator. So right now, your teacher is going to pause the video, and you guys are going to talk about what is this text, the post office book, mostly about. After listening to the text, we learned that this book is mostly about how we can mail something and how it gets to the person we're mailing it. We also learn about what a mailman does, as well as people who work in the post office. So let's dive into different key details in this text to help us better understand this topic. First, let's look at these pages. My first question for you is, what are some key details from these pages of the post office book that tell ways that people can mail things? Before we go through the process of how mail is mailed, let's talk about how are some ways that we can mail things. Your teacher's going to pause the video. I noticed by looking at the pictures and rereading the words that some ways that I can mail something and you can mail something by putting it in our mailbox or going straight to the post office. What are some key details on this page that tells us what happens first when mailing something? We know that we need to either go to a mailbox or a post office and drop the mail that we want to send, whether it's a letter, a postcard, or a package. Now, let's talk about what happens first. Your teacher's going to pause the video. I notice in the pictures and rereading the words, a letter carrier picks up mail from the mailbox, that the first thing that needs to happen is the letter carrier picks up mail. Letter carrier is also known as our mailman. Our community helper that we can find in our own communities is our mailman. They need to pick up the mail. That's the first thing. What key details on these pages tells us what happens with the mail next? We just learned that the mailman needs to pick up the mail from the mailbox or the post office. What happens next? Your teacher's going to pause the video. By looking at the pictures and reading the words, we know that the local post office sorts the mail. The mail goes to the local post office to be sorted. My next question is, what happens to out of town mail? Your teacher might pause the video and reread the words and look at the pictures to find the details that help better understand what happens to out of town mail. We know mail that we send to each other if we live next door or live a couple houses down will stay at our post office. But mail that is out of town gets put on a truck and then it's sent to a bigger post office. And that post office will make sure it gets where it needs to go. So first, we know a mail carrier picks up the mail, then the mail carrier brings it to the local post office to be sorted. What are some key details on this page that tells about canceling machines? Your teacher's going to pause the video. We learned that the mail at the post office goes through a canceling machine before it gets sent out to get mailed. We learned that a canceling machine prints postmarks such as the wavy line so it can't be used again, and this postmark makes sure that we know when it was sent out and we can be looking for it. Your teacher is going to pause the video and you guys are going to look at the pictures and read the words and decide what comes after the canceling machines that we just learned about and what key details tell us that. We learn after the canceling machines, the mail goes through sorting machines. We can see in this picture that people that work at the post office are sorting this mail. Why do you think the mail is in sorting machines? It's in sorting machines, so it goes to the right zip code. A zip code is where you live. Zip codes help the people at the post office know where to send it. Let's talk about some different ways that mail is sent. After the mail is sorted, we learned that the mail leaves the post office. What are some different ways it is traveled? Your teacher's going to pause the video. We learn on these pages by looking at the pictures and listening to the words that mail can be sorted, can travel different ways. Of course, we know a mailman can deliver it to your house, but mail that needs to go out of town or even out of country can go by trucks, by boats, and by planes. Now that we've learned what happens first, next, then, what happens last? What key details help us understand what happens last in the mailing process? Your teacher's going to pause the video. By looking at these pictures, we know that the last thing that happens in the mailing process is the person receives their letter or their package or their postcard. The mail person will drop it in their post office box or their mailbox, or maybe hand deliver it. We learned all different ways that mail is traveled. We also learned the process of what has to happen for mail to get to you. What are important details that help us understand the post office book? Your teacher is going to pause the video and talk about the important details that help us understand the post office book. When I want to go back and retell the important details in order for the post office book, I would first start off by saying people need to drop their mail in a mailbox or at the post office, and then a letter carrier picks up the mail. Then the post office helps send the mail, whether it's by boat, by plane, by truck, or maybe they hand deliver it. At the end, post workers, mailmen, will organize and deliver the mail. Today in Seesaw, you're going to draw and label 3 key details in order from the post office book. Until next time, bye, Kipsters.